You were never meant to hear this. Not from me, not from anyone. What happened in Cedar Creek, Texas, in the summer of 1899 was not a tragedy, not in the way newspapers whispered it. Not in the way the pastors spun it from their pulpits. It was something older. Something threaded into the marrow of human nature itself. And it was allowed to happen. On a June morning so hot that the air itself felt sharpened, a neighbor stepped into the Yates farmhouse and found 5 small bodies. Still, silent, arranged in their beds as if they had simply drifted away in the night. But the stillness was wrong. Too deliberate. Too final. The woman who had birthed them, Margaret Yates, sat nearby, staring into nothing, her hands slack in her lap, the rope she'd meant for herself lying on the floor. This is where the official story ends. They will tell you about a mother's melancholy, about isolation, about a fragile mind snapping under the weight of too much work and too little rest. That is the lie polite society tells to protect itself. Because the truth is not comfortable. It never has been. The truth is that Margaret's mind wasn't simply broken by circumstance, it was dismantled, piece by piece, by forces no one dared name. Forces that operated in plain sight, wearing the mask of everyday life. If you look closely, you'll see the fingerprints. In the way her husband dismissed concern not out of ignorance, but out of fear of being seen as weak in a system that demanded perfection at any cost. In the way the doctor prescribed laudanum, knowing it would keep her quiet, compliant, and easier to manage. In the way the community's morality was more about appearances than salvation, more about maintaining a picture of order than confronting the rot beneath. What happened to the Yates children was not sudden. It was a slow killing, long before the rope and the silence. This is why most men never learn the deeper laws of power, because they don't want to see the mechanics of destruction until they're the ones in the noose. You're here now, so you don't get to look away. You're going to see every step, every turn of the screw, every hand that helped push Margaret toward the edge. And when you've seen it, you will never again mistake the surface for the truth. They called her the perfect wife, not because she was loved, but because she performed. That's the part most men miss. Performance is the currency of survival in systems built on control. In Cedar Creek, the perfect wife wasn't a woman with happiness, or voice, or dreams. She was a tool, a well-oiled machine that cooked, cleaned, birthed children, and reflected well on her husband's standing. Margaret Yates understood this role the way a prisoner understands the shape of his cell. Not because she agreed with it, but because there was no way out without tearing herself apart. On the surface, she adapted well. She learned to churn butter, mend clothes, manage the farm household with the efficiency of a drill sergeant. But every adaptation was a trade, a piece of her identity surrendered in exchange for acceptance. Her refinement, her laughter, her quick wit from the city life she'd once known, all of it was stripped away, replaced with the blank efficiency frontier life demanded. And every time she bent to meet expectation, the walls closed in tighter. Understand this: the frontier wasn't just about survival. It was a crucible that separated those who could conform from those who couldn't. Men were measured by their ability to control land, livestock, and family. Women were measured by their ability to be invisible, to make the home run so smoothly that no one ever noticed the cracks. If the children were fed, the floors swept, and the husband satisfied, then the woman was well. Any sign of strain was weakness. Weakness was unacceptable. Margaret's neighbors didn't see her despair as danger, they saw it as something to be endured. They didn't rush in with help because help wasn't part of the code. The code was this: maintain the facade. Present strength. Even if it kills you. Especially if it kills you. Because the moment the mask slips, the entire social structure trembles. The truth is, Margaret was never the perfect wife. She was the perfect prisoner. Her marriage, her home, even the land under her feet, all of it was a cage built under the guise of opportunity. And every man and woman in Cedar Creek had been taught to keep the bars polished and the door locked from the inside. That's why when she began to crack, they didn't see a person breaking. They saw a machine failing. And when a machine fails, you don't heal it. You replace it. Isolation is not just being alone. It is the deliberate erosion of your mental map, the slow unhooking of every anchor that keeps you tethered to who you are. Margaret's farm was over a mile from the nearest neighbor. That's a mile of silence. A mile of heat in summer and cutting wind in winter. But the real damage wasn't the distance. It was the absence of witnesses. No one there to hear when the tone of her voice changed. No one to see when her hands trembled as she held the baby. No one to challenge the thoughts that began to loop, darker and darker, until they felt like truth. Thomas was gone more often now, chasing work and markets. His absences were not cruel in intent, but cruelty does not require intent. The result was the same. Days without adult conversation. Weeks with no one to relieve the endless grind. Imagine this: 5 children under the age of 6, all dependent on one person whose own mind was fraying. Crying at all hours. Small hands tugging at skirts. Questions she couldn't answer. Accidents to clean. Tempers to manage. And no one to pass the weight to, not even for a moment. The mind responds to such conditions by folding in on itself. Margaret's world shrank to the walls of that house, to the routine that governed survival. Wake, feed, wash, mend, discipline, sleep, repeat. Days blurred into each other until there was no yesterday, no tomorrow, just the endless now. She began speaking less. Her smile became mechanical. When she looked at her children, she saw not their faces but the tasks they represented. A crying baby was not her son, he was a problem to be solved. A hungry child was not her daughter, she was another demand on the dwindling reservoir of strength. This is the point where most men misunderstand the mechanics of control. They think breaking someone requires violence. No. You simply remove all reinforcements, social, emotional, spiritual, until the person's sense of self erodes. Isolation is a scalpel, not a hammer. And by 1898, Margaret was already cut open. She wasn't insane yet. But the protective walls of her mind, the ones that separate thought from impulse, were thinning. And once those walls are paper, all it takes is one more pressure, one more wrong push, and the self collapses inwards. Help is the word they used. But help in Cedar Creek meant something very different from rescue. It meant containment. It meant silencing the symptoms so the structure could remain unchallenged. When Margaret's decline became impossible to ignore, it wasn't the children's hollow eyes that moved the neighbors to act, it was the breach in appearances. A woman could cry in private, but to falter in public was to threaten the image of the town itself. That's when they called the doctor. Dr. Benjamin Crawford was not a healer in the sense you might hope. He was a custodian of the order. He didn't ask Margaret about her loneliness, her exhaustion, her fear. He examined her body, found nothing physically wrong, and diagnosed her with what men of the time called melancholia or hysteria. These words didn't describe an illness, they were keys that unlocked the cabinet where the real tools of control were kept. His prescription: laudanum, a syrup of opium, alcohol, and sweeteners, legal, cheap, and devastating. Laudanum didn't fix her pain. It softened the edges of it, blurred her perception, dulled her will. In small doses, it took the fight out of her. In larger doses, and she learned quickly how to reach them, it stripped away the urgency of living altogether. The baby's cry became background noise. Hunger pangs became abstractions. Her body could keep moving through the motions while her mind drifted far enough away to stop caring whether the motions made sense. The community saw this as improvement. She was calmer, less difficult. The house might still be untidy, but she wasn't breaking down in church anymore. Thomas, relieved to have his peace back, bought the medicine without question. He didn't notice the hollowing out of the woman he'd married, or if he did, he told himself it was necessary. Easier. More manageable. Understand this: the laudanum wasn't the cure. It was the leash. It allowed Margaret to be both alive and absent, physically present enough to keep the system functioning, mentally absent enough to stop threatening it. In that quiet, medicated fog, the last parts of her identity began to dissolve. She was no longer a wife or a mother or even a person in her own mind. She was an extension of the house, as replaceable and unconsidered as the tools in Thomas's shed. There is a point in every collapse where the direction can no longer be reversed. For Margaret Yates, that point came quietly, without drama, no storm, no scream, no breaking glass. It happened the way a candle gutters out in a still room. One day she was still holding the line, still operating under the instinct to protect and provide. The next, something essential was gone. The laudanum haze didn't just numb her pain, it dulled the moral reflex. Normally, a mother's mind has barricades built into it, deep-rooted walls that separate frustration from harm. But isolation had thinned those walls. Exhaustion had weakened them further, and the opiate fog seeped through the cracks, making the barriers porous. Thoughts she would have once recoiled from could now drift across her mind without resistance. She began to look at the children differently, not as people, not as her own flesh and blood, but as weight. Endless weight. They were mouths that never stopped kneading, voices that never stopped calling. She didn't hate them. Hatred would have required more energy than she had left. It was worse than that. She had reached the place where she simply wanted everything to stop. The crying, the hunger, the questions, the work, the beating of her own heart. You must understand, this is how the most unthinkable acts are born. Not in fiery rage, but in the cool, detached logic of someone who believes they've run out of moves. When the mind is reduced to pure problem-solving without emotional anchor, mercy is the first thing to go. And once mercy is gone, there is nothing left to prevent the unthinkable. Her neighbors still saw the polite nod at the general store, the quiet presence at Sunday service. They had no idea that inside the Yates home, her children were already raising themselves, hiding from her temper, learning to read the temperature of her mood the way others might check the weather. They did not see the moments when she stared too long at the rope in the shed, or the bucket by the well, or the sleeping faces in their beds, her hand hovering in the air as if weighing something. Margaret hadn't decided yet, but the part of her that would have stopped herself, the part that once loved without calculation, was gone. All that was left was the calculation, and the clock was ticking. For decades, the Whitmore name was nothing more than a polite whisper at the back of New England society gatherings, a name you'd hear in connection with generous charitable donations, yet strangely absent from the newspapers. That absence wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Behind every mayor elected, every school board decision, every piece of land rezoned for profit, there was a Whitmore hand pulling invisible strings. And it wasn't just politics. Their influence seeped into the courts, ensuring allies were untouchable and enemies quietly ruined. Old letters recovered from the estate reveal how far this network reached. One note, dated 1897, reads, "The council will vote in our favor as agreed. If dissent arises, their ledgers will be made public." It wasn't bribery alone, it was control through shame, through secrets, through fear. They didn't need to raise their voices. One glance from a Whitmore could end a career. And perhaps most disturbing of all, their power didn't fade over generations. It grew. Because the Whitmores had discovered something more valuable than money. They had mastered the art of owning the truth. You won't find it on any modern map. It's hidden behind a wall of black pines on the farthest edge of Whitmore land, a cemetery so old the stones lean like drunks after a long night, their inscriptions worn to near invisibility. Locals call it the Hollow Yard. No one is buried there anymore, at least not officially. The last recorded interment was in 1912, yet every few decades, fresh soil mounds appear. No ceremony, no obituary, just an unmarked plot where something or someone has been lowered into the ground. When a drifter named Samuel Price stumbled into the nearby village in 1954, rambling about seeing hooded figures digging in the moonlight, he was laughed off. A week later, his body was found in the river, bloated and unrecognizable, his pockets stuffed with smooth river stones. Some believe the Hollow Yard isn't a burial site at all. They think it's a holding place, a kind of waystation for those the Whitmores wanted erased. The ground there is said to swallow sound. Stand among the graves at midnight, and even your own breathing feels distant. One former caretaker, in a rare moment of loose talk at a bar, claimed there were more bodies than headstones, far more. He said the earth there has been fed well, and then he refused to say another word. They came to the Whitmore estate for work: maids, cooks, gardeners, stable hands, often desperate people with no family, no voice, and no one to come looking if they disappeared. Officially, the Whitmores were generous employers. The pay was decent for the time, and the estate provided food, lodging, and protection. But that protection came with a cost. Servants lived in a cluster of cramped stone cottages tucked behind the east wing, a place the Whitmores referred to as the quarter. At night, the windows glowed dim and orange, not from lamplight, but from the faint, ever-burning hearths that were never allowed to go out. Nobody outside the family ever learned why. From the 1890s through the 1930s, at least 27 Whitmore servants vanished without explanation. No resignation, no relocation. They were simply gone. The family's public line was that these workers had moved on. But the truth came out in whispers from those who survived long enough to leave. One former kitchen maid, interviewed decades later under a false name, claimed she was forced to scrub blood from the flagstones in the cellar, blood that dripped from above, from a wooden trapdoor leading to the family's private dining hall. Another spoke of hearing footsteps pacing her room when she knew she was alone, and of voices that spoke her name through the walls at night. Those who stayed too long became changed. Villagers said some servants who did leave seemed pulled thin, as though part of them never really escaped. And the strange part? When the estate was finally abandoned in the late 1960s, the cottages in the quarter still had fresh food in the cupboards and warm embers in the hearths. The East Wing was the most forbidden place in the entire Whitmore estate. Even visiting dignitaries and business partners were told it was under renovation, yet no workmen ever went in, and no scaffolding ever appeared. Only the Whitmore children lived there. Not the actual heirs, mind you, but children no one could trace. Pale, silent, and oddly obedient, they appeared in the household as if out of nowhere, dressed in identical gray smocks and trained to avoid eye contact with outsiders. They were seen only fleetingly darting across the hallway at dawn, standing motionless in the window while storms rolled in, or gathered in the east gardens in perfect, unnatural formation. Servants whispered that these were not children at all, but copies, replacements for those who had vanished in the nearby villages. One midwife from town claimed she was summoned to the estate in 1912 to assist in what she was told was a difficult birth. When she arrived, she found no mother in labor, only a large table surrounded by robed figures, and in the center, a child no older than 6, utterly still, eyes open and watching her. Rumors spread that the Whitmores kept these children for a ritual older than the estate itself, something to do with inheritance, longevity, and ensuring the family's spirit would never dilute. By the 1930s, disappearances of local boys and girls had become so frequent that parents stopped letting their children play in the fields near the Whitmore property. Those who ignored the warning often returned days later, unable to speak, their eyes fixed on something far away. And the strangest detail? Every one of them, every single one later, drew the same thing when given paper and pencil. A tall, faceless man in a black coat, standing in the East Wing doorway. At the farthest end of the East Wing was a sealed chamber known only as the glass room. From the outside, it looked like a conservatory, a dome of thick, curved panes held together by black iron ribs. But the glass wasn't transparent. It was clouded, warped, and veined with hairline cracks that seemed to shift in the moonlight. No servant had ever been inside. In fact, the only time anyone outside the Whitmore bloodline saw the door open was during what the family called the renewal. This happened once every 11 years, always on the night of the spring equinox. On that night, the children from the East Wing would be led into the glass room in single file, holding hands, their bare feet silent on the marble floor. The family dressed in black, wearing gloves, would follow. Then the door would shut, and something else would begin. Neighbors spoke of strange sounds carrying on the wind, not screams exactly, but a high, resonant hum, like a chorus of voices speaking in a language no one could place. The sound would rise, peak, and then suddenly stop, leaving the entire estate in a dead, unnatural silence. In the morning, the children who had gone in were not the same. Some came out taller, older, their faces subtly altered. Others emerged younger, smaller, as if years had been stolen from them. A few never came out at all. A local stonemason who once repaired part of the dome swore the interior walls were not made of stone at all, but of a single, seamless black mirror. He claimed he saw his own reflection blink at him even though he hadn't moved. It said that whatever happened in that room wasn't just for the Whitmore's power or wealth, but for something far darker. Something that made the family less human with each renewal. Death in the Whitmore estate was never ordinary. The family adhered to the public rites obituaries, small gatherings, church funerals all staged for neighbors and distant relatives. But the truth was far stranger, far darker. Inside the estate, death was a transition. The moment someone of the bloodline died, they were moved to a hidden chamber beneath the west wing, a crypt so vast it had never been fully mapped. The coffins weren't placed in rows. They were arranged in geometric patterns that scholars would later identify as occult sigils. Every corpse was positioned according to birth date, birth hour, and even lunar phase. Those who entered the chamber spoke of the smell, first a sharp, metallic tang that clung to the air like smoke. Then the silence. Not ordinary silence, but the kind that presses against your ears, your chest, your mind. It was as if the dead themselves were watching, waiting, judging. But it wasn't just about storing the bodies. The Whitmores believed that the energy of their ancestors could be harnessed, transferred, and recycled. Certain rituals required the living to sit among the dead, to speak their names aloud, to channel the presence of those who had already passed. Failure to perform the ritual precisely would result in what they called the void, touching the line, a mysterious, sometimes fatal outcome. Servants whispered that sometimes the corpses didn't remain still. Hands would twitch, heads would tilt, eyes would appear to follow the movement of those in the room. No outsider ever dared linger long enough to find out if it was delusion or something far more sinister. And here is the unsettling truth: many of the disappearances in Cedar Creek, the children from the East Wing, the servants who vanished, they were never gone. They had been absorbed into the Whitmore death rituals, transformed from living flesh into spectral energy, trapped inside the family's occult machinery. By the 1940s, the estate's reputation was whispered about even beyond New England. Outsiders who poked too deeply were either dismissed as lunatics or simply vanished. The Whitmore family had perfected the art of invisibility through terror. Power, in the Whitmore tradition, was never inherited by chance. It was contracted, signed, sealed, and in the strictest sense, paid for in blood. Behind closed doors, generations of Whitmores drafted agreements that were far more than legal documents. They were oaths bound by ritual, inked not merely on parchment, but with the blood of family members, servants, and those unfortunate enough to cross the estate. Each signature was a literal tie, a transfer of obligation and, in some cases, of life force itself. The contracts were meticulous. One would not simply pledge loyalty or labor. The text demanded obedience to rules that outsiders would find incomprehensible: prohibitions against speaking of the estate, against forming attachments outside the family, even against thinking certain thoughts. Breaking the contract could mean disappearance, madness, or death. And the Whitmores enforced these clauses with precision. In the 1920s, a young clerk discovered an old ledger buried beneath the foundation of the East Wing. Every name listed corresponded to someone who vanished shortly afterward: neighbors, hired hands, even distant cousins who had visited for the summer. Beside each name was a mark, a symbol so strange that the clerk could not interpret it. Within a month, he too vanished. His family insisted he simply left, but his belongings remained in his home, untouched, as if he had never returned. The most chilling aspect of these contracts wasn't the enforcement. It was the psychological manipulation. Signatories weren't just coerced, they were conditioned. From childhood, the Whitmore heirs and servants learned the language of fear, the subtle cues of expectation. They internalized the rules. By the time they could reason for themselves, their compliance had become instinct. It is here that the Whitmore's genius becomes terrifying. They didn't need guards, locks, or guns. Their power was woven into minds, encoded into obedience, and reinforced by generations of ritual. In other words, they created a system that ran itself. For the outsider, it looks like wealth, privilege, influence. For the insider, it is a cage made of invisible steel, and every contract, every signature, every drop of blood only tightens the bars. Not all who approached the Whitmore estate were born into servitude or bound by blood contracts. Some were mere visitors, curious, ambitious, or reckless souls drawn by the whispers of wealth and influence. But the estate had a way of ensuring that curiosity was punished. Accounts collected from the surrounding towns speak of men arriving to discuss business deals, political favors, or even mundane social calls and vanishing within hours. Carriages would leave the gate, the driver returning alone, claiming the guest had taken ill and gone on to the next town. But the details never matched. In many cases, neighbors noted the carriage never actually left the grounds. The disappearances were subtle, systematic. No one heard screams, no one saw abductions. It was as if the estate itself swallowed intruders, a living, breathing entity that rejected outsiders. And yet, the Whitmores remained perfectly calm, polite, even apologetic when questioned. A smooth excuse, a hand extended in condolence, and the townsfolk were left to wonder if they had imagined the whole thing. Some of the vanishing visitors were never found. Others emerged years later, disoriented, unable to speak, their minds fragmented. One survivor claimed to have spent years wandering through corridors that never ended, lined with mirrors that reflected not his face, but that of the Whitmore children, frozen in silent observation. This wasn't mere kidnapping or murder. It was psychological control elevated to the level of art. The visitors became part of the estate's ecosystem, whether they realized it or not. Time, memory, and identity were warped until their lives were absorbed into the machinery of the family's dominance. And here is the cruelest part. No one outside the family was ever permitted to understand the mechanism behind these vanishings. It was deliberately inscrutable, designed to instill fear and helplessness. Anyone who tried to uncover it too deeply often became one of the missing themselves. By the mid-20th century, the Whitmores had perfected a system where wealth, bloodline, secrecy, and terror intertwined so tightly that even the most clever outsiders could not escape their invisible web. They were untouchable, omnipresent, and quietly immortal in their influence. Walk through the Whitmore estate and you'll notice it immediately. The walls whisper. Not literally, of course, but in the way shadows cling to corners and faint scratches trace patterns beneath layers of paint and wallpaper. These markings were never random. They were intentional, coded, and terrifyingly precise. Some look like simple tally marks, scratched in with fingernails or knife points, but others form symbols, circles within triangles, spirals, runes, and sigils that defy comprehension. Locals who dared peer through windows reported seeing children tracing these shapes on the walls at night, chanting softly. Servants swore they could hear the whispers of previous generations encoded in the carving's instructions, warnings, and commands that no outsider could decode. Historians who later gained limited access to the estate noticed patterns repeating throughout the house. Certain symbols corresponded to the east wing, others to the glass room, still others to hidden chambers below the west wing. It became clear, the walls themselves were a map of the Whitmore's psychological architecture, a coded guide to power, obedience, and control. One researcher, examining the main hall under ultraviolet light, discovered faint handprints that didn't belong to any recorded family member. When cross-referenced with missing persons reports, a chilling hypothesis emerged: the estate was actively documenting its victims, marking the passage of lives into its hidden machinery. The house itself had become both witness and participant in the family's dark enterprise. Even more unsettling, the patterns were dynamic. New scratches appeared over time, as if the walls had memory. Caretakers swore the marks would shift overnight, revealing messages to those attuned enough to notice. Some interpreted them as warnings. Others saw them as commands. The estate was alive in a sense no one dared name aloud. This was no ordinary mansion. It was a psychological labyrinth, a cathedral of control built brick by brick, ritual by ritual, generation by generation. Those who entered unprepared found themselves not just observing history, they became part of it. Their footsteps and whispers etched invisibly into the walls, awaiting the next renewal. Caretakers were not merely employees at the Whitmore estate. They were apprentices in a school of fear, trained to read the house as if it were a living entity, to anticipate its moods, and to obey its silent dictates. Every step they took, every word they spoke, was measured against unseen standards, and failure carried consequences that were swift and cruel. Instructions were never spoken plainly. They came in whispers, half-words, and cryptic gestures. A flick of a hand could mean, "Clean this room again," or "Do not enter there until the family permits." Sometimes the family's presence wasn't required. The house itself would communicate. Shadows would stretch in unnatural ways. Doors would creak at precise intervals, and subtle temperature changes warned the attentive of a mistake about to be punished. Caretakers learned to obey instinctively. They memorized every marking on the walls, every turn in the corridors, and every symbol in the glass room. In doing so, they became extensions of the family's will, maintaining the invisible mechanisms of power and ritual that kept the Whitmores untouchable. And yet, the lessons weren't just about survival, they were about transformation. Those who spent long periods within the estate's walls often emerged different. Their eyes carried a depth of fear, and sometimes an unsettling awareness of things they could not articulate. It was as though the house had imprinted on them its knowledge, its rituals, and its secrets, creating silent witnesses who could never leave the truth behind. But there was a price. The deeper a caretaker immersed themselves, the more they internalized the family's rules until eventually, their own moral compass became indistinguishable from the code of the house. Many vanished quietly over decades, their identities absorbed into the estate itself, leaving only the whispers they had learned to speak. This system, this psychological architecture, ensured that the Whitmore's secrets could endure indefinitely. The house became a self-regulating machine, teaching, punishing, and preserving knowledge that no outsider could comprehend. Those who survived it were never the same. There is a night every year when the Whitmore estate ceases to be a mere house and becomes something far more formidable, a living apparatus of power. Locals call it a night of storms, of unnatural winds and sudden blackouts, but those who know the truth whisper its proper name: the annual convergence. On this night, every hidden corridor, every secret chamber, and every wall marking resonates in synchrony. The east wing hums with a low vibration. The glass room reflects shadows that don't belong to anyone present, and the west crypt pulses with a rhythm that feels like a heartbeat. It is not just sound or light, it is the estate asserting itself, awakening its mechanisms of control. The Whitmore family gathers in full ritual, dressed in black robes that reach the floor. Children from the east wing stand in precise formation, their faces masks of obedience, their eyes reflecting a knowledge far beyond their years. Servants, now fully trained in the estate's silent language, move without a sound, anticipating every need, every gesture. What occurs within those walls is impossible to describe fully because it operates on multiple levels: psychological, spiritual, and physical. Some observers, those few who have glimpsed the estate from afar, report seeing flashes of light like spectral fires, hearing whispers that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Others claim the air itself vibrates with energy, pressing against the chest, the mind, even the soul. It is during the convergence that the estate's true purpose becomes visible to those initiated enough to perceive it. Power is redistributed, contracts reaffirmed, and the family's invisible dominion over bloodlines, servants, and the surrounding land is reinforced. The house itself seems to feed on fear and obedience, and the Whitmores more than ever become less human, more force. By dawn, the estate is calm again, the corridors silent, the walls still. But those who were inside know that something fundamental has shifted. The living have been reshaped, the dead have been realigned, and the estate itself has absorbed yet another layer of energy, growing stronger and more inscrutable. The Whitmore Gardens were not designed for beauty alone. From the moment you stepped onto the grounds, the carefully arranged paths, hedges, and flower beds seemed almost sentient, guiding visitors in ways they did not understand. Each plant, each tree, was positioned with purpose, a silent participant in the family's psychological dominion. Servants whispered that the garden was a living map of control. Paths that curved too gently forced you to linger, heightening anxiety. Certain flowers exuded subtle scents meant to calm or disorient, depending on who wandered among them. The layout was a trap and a lesson. Even in the open air, obedience was compulsory, observation constant. But the most unsettling aspect was the whispering. At twilight, when the wind threaded through the carefully pruned branches, it carried voices low, distant, but unmistakably human. Sometimes it sounded like advice, sometimes like warnings. Those uninitiated often dismissed it as imagination. Those who had spent years within the estate recognized it for what it truly was. The estate speaking, transmitting orders, memories, and affirmations of power. Children from the East Wing would spend hours in the gardens during training. They learned to follow invisible cues. A flick of a branch, the subtle sway of a vine, even the rustle of leaves as indicators of right or wrong behavior. Every step was recorded, every hesitation noted. The gardens were classrooms, prisons, and mirrors all at once. Visitors who wandered into the gardens uninvited often never returned. Some say the plants themselves shifted subtly, diverting them deeper into corridors that seemed impossibly elongated, until they were swallowed by the estate's hidden chambers. Others spoke of shadows detaching from trees, of figures moving just beyond sight, always following, always observing. By the 1940s, the gardens had become an extension of the family's dominion, a place where the Whitmores could project influence without speaking a word. It was an art of subtle control, a demonstration of their mastery over both people and environment. Every path, every whisper, every living branch existed to enforce obedience, to maintain secrecy, and to shape reality itself according to the family's will. The lost, those who vanished from the Whitmore estate, did not simply cease to exist. In the twisted architecture of the house, they became echoes, fragments of presence and memory, tethered to the estate in ways that defy ordinary understanding. These echoes were subtle at first. A flicker in the corner of your vision, the sound of a child's footsteps in an empty corridor, or the faint scent of someone who should not be there. Servants quickly learned to recognize them, to move around them, and in some cases to avoid provoking them. The echoes were neither living nor dead, yet they exerted influence over those who walked among them. Visitors who glimpsed the echoes described a profound disorientation, a feeling that the house was alive, watching, judging, and interacting with them. The children of the East Wing, trained in this subtle manipulation, could read these echoes instinctively, learning to navigate fear, to manipulate presence, and to channel attention exactly where the family wanted it. The lost also played a practical role in maintaining the estate's power. Whispers suggest that some were drawn into ritual cycles, repeating actions in spectral loops, sustaining the energy required for the glass room, the East Wing, and the West Crypt. Their fear, memory, and obedience became a hidden resource, a reservoir of power that the Whitmores tapped into to fortify their dominion. Even the architecture was designed to amplify the echoes. Hallways, mirrors, and hidden chambers reflected sound and movement in ways that intensified psychological pressure. A door opening in one corridor could send vibrations through the East Wing, creating the impression that someone or something was following. Every echo, every tremor, every faint whisper was a lesson in the house's omnipresent authority. And yet, the echoes were not passive. They retained fragments of identity, glimpses of humanity. Those attuned could sometimes communicate with them, hear their warnings, or catch fleeting memories of life before disappearance. It was terrifying and seductive, a constant reminder that the Whitmores' reach extended beyond the living, blurring the boundary between life, death, and control. Hidden deep within the West Wing, behind a false panel that could only be opened at the precise hour of the full moon, lay the Codex of Shadows. This was no ordinary book. Bound in blackened leather and etched with symbols that seemed to writhe under candlelight, it contained a meticulous record of every act, every disappearance, every ritual performed by the Whitmore family for generations. The Codex was organized not by time, but by influence and consequence. Names of servants, children, and visitors who vanished were catalogued alongside diagrams of the rooms where they were last seen, markings on the walls, and even the alignment of the stars on the night of their disappearance. Every detail mattered. Nothing was accidental. Everything was deliberate. Caretakers who had glimpsed it described a sensation of being watched as though the Codex itself had awareness, recording not just the events, but the reactions of those who read it. One young servant noted that after touching the pages, she could hear the faint whisper of names she had never encountered, each syllable vibrating like a pulse through the room. The family used the codex as both a manual and a weapon. It instructed them in the timing of rituals, the proper orientation of the glass room, and the cyclical maintenance of the estate's psychological machinery. Breaking its rules was unthinkable. Misinterpreting its symbols could result in disaster, sometimes death. What made the codex truly terrifying, however, was its implication. Every act of disappearance, every manipulation, was calculated not just to assert control, but to enhance the family's power over time itself. The document suggested a grand, sinister design, a blueprint for extending influence beyond mortality, binding generations in a network of obedience, fear, and unseen energy. Researchers who later obtained fragments of the codex struggled to comprehend it. The pages seemed to shift subtly when unobserved, diagrams transforming, words rearranging themselves. It was as if the codex were alive, protecting its secrets, ensuring that only those the Whitmores deemed worthy could ever understand its full power. The Codex of Shadows was more than a ledger. It was a key to understanding the Whitmores' enduring dominion. To read it was to gaze into a mirror of obsession, cruelty, and meticulously engineered terror, and perhaps, to become part of its continuing story. The Whitmore legacy was never just wealth, land, or influence. It was a curriculum of control, encoded within the blood of each heir, passed down with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. From birth, children absorbed lessons no one could teach, instincts honed by fear, manipulation, and the subtle architecture of obedience embedded within the estate itself. Parents were only part of the instruction. The house, the codex, the gardens, even the walls all conspired to shape each child. By the time the first memory formed, they were already participating in a centuries-long experiment. Learning when to speak, when to stay silent, when to assert authority, and when to kneel to unseen forces. The bloodline itself became a repository of knowledge and power, carrying whispers of every ritual, every secret, and every disappearance that came before. Observing a Whitmore child at play is deceiving. Their laughter is not innocence but practice. Their games are simulations of control, predicting reactions, testing limits, observing weaknesses. Visitors often misread these children as precocious or unusually intelligent. They are something else entirely, living instruments of the estate's machinery, trained in its invisible rules before they can even read. The psychological impact is profound. Each heir is conditioned to understand hierarchy intuitively, to detect deception, to impose dominance subtly. Disobedience is met not with overt punishment alone, but with the silent, unrelenting pressure of expectation, a force as inexorable as gravity. Even adults who marry into the family quickly feel the weight of this inherited authority. They become subjects whether they recognize it or not. And the consequences of stepping outside the bloodline's invisible code are severe. History is littered with examples of relatives who resisted, who questioned, or who sought to escape. Some vanished entirely. Others survived only to live in fragmented, broken states, their potential for influence dissolved by the estate's relentless shaping. This is the true terror of the Whitmore bloodline. Power is never lost, never diluted, and never accidental. Each generation amplifies the influence of the last, creating a chain of psychological dominion that stretches beyond any one lifetime, until it becomes almost indistinguishable from immortality itself. Within the Whitmore estate, nothing escaped notice. Not the fleeting glance of a servant, not the hesitant footstep of a child, not the anxious tremor of a visitor. For every room, hallway, and garden path, there existed a silent observer, trained, planted, and loyal to the estate above all else. These observers were not always human. Some were children, carefully instructed to watch, memorize, and report without hesitation. Others were servants, conditioned from the moment they arrived to see without being seen, to record details that might seem inconsequential to an outsider but were critical to the family's operation. Every whisper, every gesture, Every hesitation was noted and stored in memory, a living intelligence network that operated continuously. Even more disturbing were the hidden chambers and secret passages the observers used. From small peepholes behind mirrors to vents running under floors, the estate itself facilitated surveillance. Anyone attempting to act independently, to question, or to escape would unknowingly step into this web of scrutiny. The house enforced obedience, but the observers ensured compliance. Failure was visible before the act was even completed. Visitors often reported an uncanny sensation, the feeling of being watched by eyes that weren't theirs to see. Some claimed they felt a presence behind every door, shadowy figures always one step ahead, predicting their movements. Few survived these encounters without mental scars, their memories permanently altered by the constant, invisible attention. The observers were also agents of psychological warfare. A simple glance, a barely audible word, or a subtle placement in the wrong room could destabilize even the most confident adult. Fear became a tool of the estate, wielded indirectly, reinforced through repetition, observation, and strategic punishment. Every behavior was mapped, every reaction catalogued, contributing to a comprehensive understanding of the human psyche that only the Whitmores could exploit. This network extended beyond the estate itself. Allies, loyalists, and even coerced neighbors became extensions of the family's watchful eyes, creating a sphere of influence that stretched miles. The Whitmores were never truly alone, and neither were their subjects. The entire region became a chessboard, and every soul a piece in a game whose rules were invisible and absolute. Of all the Whitmore traditions, none is as feared, whispered about, or meticulously hidden as the ritual of the fifth child. It is a ceremony that transcends superstition, morality, and conventional understanding, a dark architecture of control that binds the family's lineage and fortifies its dominion. The ritual is performed only when the fifth child of a generation reaches the age of 8, though variations exist in certain branches of the family. The child is not simply an heir. They are a living key, an embodiment of both vulnerability and potential power. Every action leading to this point has been orchestrated by the estate, the codex, and the silent observers, ensuring the child is precisely prepared, obedient, aware, and malleable. On the night of the ritual, the estate transforms. Hallways are lit with candles placed in exact geometries, shadows engineered to stretch unnaturally. Symbols from the codex are carved along walls and floors. The glass room, long a repository of energy and memory, becomes the stage. The child is led in silence, guided by whispers and gestures, through corridors that seem longer, darker, and more alive than ever before. The ceremony itself is both literal and symbolic. It is a test of obedience, endurance, and submission to the invisible currents that govern the family. The child is required to confront embodied echoes of lost ancestors, reenact rituals performed generations prior, and demonstrate understanding of the estate's subtle dominion. Every hesitation, every sign of fear, is recorded, internalized, and used to reinforce the psychological architecture the family depends upon. Observers note that the ritual changes those who witness it, not just the child, but siblings, servants, and even parents. Each becomes acutely aware of the estate's omnipotence. The child emerges altered, carrying the imprint of the ceremony, a bridge between the estate's past and its future. In this way, the Whitmores perpetuate an invisible chain of mastery over fear, obedience, and control that few outside the bloodline can comprehend. To the uninitiated, this may seem mythic or exaggerated, but the estate bears the evidence, layers of memory embedded in walls, gardens, and corridors, proof that the ritual is not mere superstition. It is a mechanism of power, precise, terrifying, and inescapable. The glass room is not merely a chamber. It is the heart of the Whitmore estate's intelligence, a place where perception, reality, and fear converge. The walls are constructed from panes of specialized glass, polished to a near-mirror sheen, but they do more than reflect. They capture intent, recording the subtle motions of the mind and body, translating thought into visible patterns only the family can interpret. Visitors enter, believing it is simply a parlor or a study. But the room has its own agenda. A servant's hesitation, a child's curiosity, a guest's arrogance, all are magnified, replayed in reflections that seem to exist independently of the physical world. Shadows twist unnaturally, voices echo faintly, and surfaces ripple as though the room itself breathes. Each reflection is a message, a warning, a record of compliance or defiance. The glass room is both a test and a tool. Those who enter unaware often leave fractured, unsettled, their thoughts exposed in ways they cannot articulate. Some swear they saw themselves doing things they never actually did, as though the room manipulated perception to align behavior with the estate's expectations. Others describe glimpses of past visitors, frozen in the same mirrored spaces, eternally observing, silently judging. Children trained in the estate's ways learn to read the room instinctively. They recognize subtle cues, the faint warping of a reflection, a shadow that lingers longer than it should, or the imperceptible hum that signals attention. In this space, obedience is not suggested, it is inevitable. Every movement, every glance, is absorbed and interpreted, reinforcing the Whitmore's unseen authority. Even the family is not immune. The glass room provides insight into intentions, emotional states, and hidden fears. It is a mirror of power, allowing the Whitmores to manipulate, influence, and sometimes terrify before a word is spoken. Lessons learned here extend far beyond the room itself, shaping behavior long after the visitor has left. In essence, the glass room is a microcosm of the estate, an ecosystem of observation, reflection, and control. Captures more than actions, it captures the soul. Those who experience it cannot remain unchanged. They carry its imprint, an invisible tether to the house, the family, and the legacy of fear and obedience that sustains the Whitmore's dominion. The East Wing is more than a section of the Whitmore estate. It is a crucible, a deliberate testing ground for heirs, where children confront fear, loyalty, and the very boundaries of their own psyche. Entry is not granted lightly. Only those born into the bloodline or carefully selected outsiders may face the series of trials known collectively as the East Wing initiation. At first glance, the wing appears ordinary narrow hallways, modest chambers, and a library filled with texts that seem innocuous. But the moment the heir steps beyond the threshold, the estate reveals its true nature. Doors that were open close without sound, hallways lengthen or twist, shadows warp, and whispers float just out of reach. The East Wing reacts to hesitation, doubt, and defiance, magnifying every weakness, turning the child's mind into a battlefield. The trials are both mental and physical. A child may be asked to navigate a maze with invisible walls, guided only by subtle cues in the flooring or faint patterns on the walls. Another might confront a simulation of past family tragedies, forced to make decisions with no right answers. Each test is meticulously recorded in the codex, every response catalogued, every error preserved for future reference. Pain is never gratuitous. It is a teacher. Fear is never random. It is a mechanism for instilling control, focus, and obedience. Children who falter are not punished in the traditional sense. They are subtly redirected, taught to anticipate the estate's intentions before a command is given. This early conditioning ensures that by adulthood, the heirs act with the precision of someone who has internalized an invisible hierarchy of authority. The psychological stakes are amplified by the knowledge that observation is constant. Invisible eyes, the silent observers of the estate, track every movement, every breath, every expression. Even when alone, no child truly experiences solitude. The East Wing enforces an awareness of omnipresence. The estate sees all, knows all, and rewards compliance while exposing weakness. By the completion of the initiation, a child emerges fundamentally altered. The East Wing is no longer a place but a lens through which reality is perceived. Subtle signals become commands, whispers become directives, and obedience becomes instinct. The family gains not just a successor, but a fully integrated instrument of its psychological machinery. Beneath the estate lies the West Crypt, a subterranean chamber hidden behind walls of reinforced stone, known only to the family and their most trusted confidants. Here, The Whitmores conduct the convergence, a ceremony that binds the living, the echoes of the lost, and the estate itself into a unified network of power. The crypt is a labyrinth of shadowed passages, lined with symbols drawn from the codex, each glowing faintly under candlelight. The walls seem to hum, vibrating with the energy of countless rituals performed over generations. Observers speak of a sense of gravity in the air, as if stepping into the crypt is stepping into a place outside the ordinary flow of time, where past and present converge. During the convergence, heirs and selected initiates are led through a series of trials designed to awaken latent abilities to see the unseen, to hear the whispers of echoes, and to manipulate the psychological currents that sustain the estate. Each action, each choice, is both a test and a teaching, reinforcing the hierarchy that governs the family's dominion. The echoes of the lost play a central role. Their presence is not passive. They are participants and amplifiers, their fear and memory fueling the energy of the crypt. It is said that the whispers of those who vanished long ago guide the ritual, correcting missteps, intensifying fear where necessary, and ensuring that the family's methods remain precise and unbroken. Power is not granted in the crypt. It is absorbed, assimilated through experience and ritual. Those who emerge are fundamentally changed, sharper, more aware, more attuned to the estate's mechanisms, and capable of exerting influence with a subtlety that is almost imperceptible to outsiders. Even a brief exposure leaves a permanent imprint, a tether connecting the participant to the crypt's accumulated energy. The West Crypt convergence is the ultimate expression of the Whitmore philosophy: control through observation, fear, and manipulation. It is here that the estate's secrets are consolidated, its hierarchies reinforced, and its dominion over the living and the echoes alike secured. The convergence is both terrifying and intoxicating, a reminder that the estate's power is absolute, and that to step inside is to accept a new reality in which obedience and understanding are inseparable. At the center of the West Crypt stands the Mirror of Obedience, a massive vertical pane of glass unlike any ordinary reflection. Its surface shimmers with a strange inner light, a luminescence that seems to penetrate the soul rather than the eyes. This is not a mirror for vanity or self-examination. It is a mechanism of revelation, judgment, and control. The mirror does not show mere appearances. It exposes intentions, fears, and hidden impulses, laying them bare in a way that is almost unbearable to behold. A lie told to oneself, a secret desire, a hesitation, all are magnified and reflected with crystalline clarity. Those who approach it are forced to confront themselves entirely, stripped of pretense or concealment. The process is exacting. Initiates are led in silence, guided by family elders and the subtle manipulations of the echoes. When a subject gazes into the mirror, it responds to thought and emotion, not light. A flicker of rebellion, a spark of doubt, even the smallest flicker of defiance is amplified, reshaping the reflection until the subject either bends to the estate's will or breaks entirely. Few survive the first exposure unchanged. Many stumble back, pale and shaken, unable to articulate what they saw, yet haunted by the truth they cannot unsee. Those who master the mirror gain extraordinary insight, the ability to read others, anticipate reactions, and subtly manipulate outcomes. The Whitmores use this insight to extend influence beyond the estate, into the minds and actions of those who think themselves free. The mirror is not passive. It learns, adapts, and communicates with the family. Subtle changes in reflection signal alignment with the estate's expectations, while distortions warn of potential disobedience. In this way, the mirror is both a weapon and a teacher, enforcing the philosophy that obedience is not demanded, it is revealed, internalized, and perfected through confrontation with the self. Legends suggest that the mirror's influence extends beyond the crypt. Visitors who have gazed too long report nightmares, compulsions, and even subtle shifts in perception long after leaving the estate. The power of the mirror is cumulative, a living instrument of the Whitmore's dominion, ensuring that truth, submission, and control are inseparable, permanent, and inescapable. Among the Whitmore heirs, none are spoken of with as much awe or dread as the twins, Annabelle and Elias. From birth, they were marked for significance, their every action observed, every decision recorded, as though the estate itself had chosen them for a destiny beyond mere inheritance. Their journey was a study in psychological precision, a blueprint for mastery embedded into flesh and blood. The twins' education began early. They were taught to read not just the codex, but the subtle currents of thought and behavior in everyone around them. Their games were exercises in influence, persuading one another with imperceptible cues, manipulating a sibling's emotions to achieve compliance, learning the art of patience, observation, and control. By the age of 6, they were already executing tasks no ordinary child could comprehend, yet doing so with a seamless, almost natural grace. The glass room became their classroom. Alone and together, they were exposed to its mirrored corridors and subtle distortions, learning to interpret the shifting reflections, to read the intentions of those unseen observers, and to anticipate the unseen pressures of the estate. Each session strengthened their awareness, creating a bond between them that was both protective and strategic. They were extensions of one another, amplifying the estate's power through unity. Their ascension reached its zenith with the mirror of obedience. When first confronted with the artifact, most heirs flinched, resisted, or faltered. The twins did not. They gazed into its surface, met the raw truth of their own impulses, and emerged transformed. Fear was replaced with calculated certainty. Hesitation dissolved into decisive action. In that moment, they became conduits, living instruments through which the estate could project influence outward, beyond walls, beyond witnesses, beyond time itself. Their mastery was not only psychological but physical. Subtle gestures, a glance, a tone of voice, each could command attention, bend will, and assert dominance. The twins became the embodiment of the estate's philosophy. Obedience, fear, and power intertwined, perfected, and transmitted across generations. Those who encountered them reported an unsettling presence, a sense of being understood and anticipated in ways that felt almost impossible. The twins' ascension is a warning as much as it is a marvel. It illustrates the terrifying precision of the Whitmore methods, the interweaving of training, observation, and ritual that produces agents of influence far beyond ordinary human capability. And it demonstrates that within the Whitmore estate, mastery is not given, it is claimed, enforced, and internalized, leaving nothing untouched by its pervasive authority. Hidden behind a false wall in the northern wing lies the Forgotten Chamber, a room the Whitmores rarely speak of, yet its presence is felt by all who inhabit the estate. The air inside is thick, almost viscous, carrying the scent of aged parchment, candle smoke, and something indefinably older, a memory of power and transgression that refuses to fade. The chamber is a repository of secrets, artifacts, and records that span generations. Here are journals written in invisible ink, ceremonial tools worn smooth by decades of ritual, and fragments of letters hinting at horrors the outside world would never imagine. The walls themselves seem to hum with residual energy, whispers of ancestors who lived and acted in alignment with the estate's principles of control, obedience, and unseen dominion. It is in this space that the full scope of the Whitmore legacy becomes apparent. Items are not mere curiosities. They are instruments of manipulation, each designed to preserve psychological insight, track compliance, and amplify the influence of the family's most subtle teachings. A comb, a chalice, a child's worn toy, each carries encoded knowledge, a cipher of intent and memory, waiting for those trained enough to understand its power. Visitors, if they are permitted entry, report profound disorientation. Time seems to distort. Shadows shift with a life of their own, and every reflection feels laden with meaning. Even the most skeptical find themselves unnerved, as though the chamber itself is aware of their doubts, cataloging them with silent precision. Every step becomes a negotiation, every breath a conscious submission to the weight of accumulated power that saturates the room. The Forgotten Chamber is also a place of warning. It chronicles failures, departures, and rebellions, the rare instances when heirs faltered, outsiders resisted, or the estate's designs were temporarily thwarted. These remnants act as both deterrent and lesson, a silent reminder that knowledge and transgression are inseparably linked, and that those who seek understanding without respect may find themselves consumed by the very truths they pursue. In essence, the chamber embodies the Whitmore philosophy. Power is preserved not just in wealth or lineage, but in the careful curation of memory, ritual, and the psychological imprints left upon all who cross the estate's threshold. It is a testament to the precision, persistence, and darkness that define the family's dominion, a space where the past lingers and the future is quietly dictated. The Codex is far more than a family heirloom or a collection of old writings. It is the Whitmore family's blueprint for dominion, a meticulous guide outlining psychological strategies, social manipulations, and rituals designed to maintain control over both the estate and the wider world. Every page is a study in human behavior, detailing methods to observe, predict, and bend individuals to the family's will without overt force. Its origins are deliberately obscured. Some claim it was compiled by the earliest Whitmores, who traveled extensively, gathering knowledge of secret societies, arcane psychology, and forbidden rituals. Others whisper of ancient collaborators, men and women who passed down esoteric practices that predated even the founding of the estate itself. The result is a document that operates on multiple planes: legal, social, psychological, and mystical, a manual for influence so precise it can predict outcomes before they occur. The Codex teaches that power is silent. Control is never obvious. It is subtle, integrated into the routines of daily life. Every interaction, every word spoken, every shadow in a room is an opportunity to influence perception, instill obedience, and enforce hierarchy. Children are trained using these methods. Servants internalize them. Visitors are subtly guided through behavior and expectation. The family's dominion is thus total, though invisible to those uninitiated. It also encodes warnings and contingencies. Notes in margins detail failures, rebellions, and deviations from established patterns, creating a living document that evolves with each generation. The Codex ensures continuity. No matter who sits at the head of the estate, the principles remain intact, allowing the Whitmores to adapt while maintaining absolute control over knowledge, fear, and obedience. Most strikingly, the Codex serves as a psychological weapon. It is designed to cultivate awareness of hidden forces, making those trained under it hyperconscious of observation, influence, and manipulation. By the time an heir is ready to lead, the Codex has already sculpted their perception, aligning thought, emotion, and action with the estate's imperatives. They become living extensions of its principles, instruments through which fear, loyalty, and secrecy are perpetuated seamlessly. The Codex is not simply a book. It is a map of power, a key to understanding the mechanics of domination that few can recognize, and even fewer survive. To read it without preparation is to invite confusion, madness, or exposure to truths too precise and too potent for ordinary minds. It is a warning that knowledge is inseparable from consequence, a principle the Whitmores have perfected for generations. The ceremony of the silent oath is not a spectacle. It is not announced, and it is never witnessed by outsiders. It is a ritual performed in near-total darkness, a passage from adolescence into complete alignment with the estate's principles, and it carries a weight that cannot be overstated. Here, the Whitmore heir is stripped of individual hesitation and molded into a living embodiment of the family's dominion. The chamber where the oath takes place is austere. Stone walls, polished floors, and a single, narrow beam of candlelight illuminating the Codex, open and awaiting the signature of mind and soul. The heir kneels before it, accompanied by the elders and the echoes, those who have passed but remain bound to the estate. Silence dominates, and every heartbeat is amplified in the mind, every breath a signal of presence and submission. The ritual itself is more psychological than physical. Words are minimal. The Codex provides all instructions. The heir's thoughts are guided, their attention focused on obedience, perception, and the unspoken rules of the estate. Every hesitation, doubt, or defiance is immediately noted by the elders and reflected back in subtle ways. The flicker of a shadow, a change in candlelight, or the faint, almost imperceptible murmur of the echoes. The heir learns quickly control must be absolute, internalized, and unbroken. The silent oath binds the mind and spirit. By the conclusion, The heir has internalized the principles of surveillance, influence, and subtle coercion. They are trained to read intentions before words are spoken, to detect manipulation before it takes form, and to project authority without a single overt command. Obedience becomes instinctual. Fear becomes a tool. Knowledge becomes a weapon. This is the final crucible of transformation, the moment when the Whitmore heir becomes fully operational within the estate's intricate machinery. Legends say that those who fail the oath are not merely dismissed. They are erased in ways both symbolic and practical. Their presence remains as a cautionary echo, a shadow in the corridors, a whispered warning to successors that the estate tolerates no deviation from its meticulously crafted order. It is a psychological calibration, ensuring that every heir who emerges is refined, unflinching, and inseparable from the Whitmore legacy. The ceremony of the silent oath demonstrates the terrifying efficiency of the estate. Power is inherited not through privilege, but through the meticulous training, observation, and enforcement of absolute obedience. By the end, the heir carries the weight of generations, the echoes of the lost, and the unbroken authority of the Codex, fully aware that deviation is unthinkable and failure is unendurable. Every empire, every institution of power, requires a guardian, and in the Whitmore estate, this guardian is the keeper of secrets. This figure is neither fully seen nor easily understood, existing at the threshold between the living and the echoes, between knowledge and control. The keeper's duty is absolute: to preserve, enforce, and extend the estate's dominion across generations, ensuring that no truth is lost, no deviation tolerated. The keeper is trained from youth, chosen not by birth alone but by the precise alignment of intellect, perception, and psychological resilience. They are the only individual capable of interpreting the Codex in its entirety, connecting each ritual, artifact, and trial into a single network of power. Their memory is said to be near perfect, cataloging the minutiae of every heir's behavior, every ritual's effect, and every subtle ripple caused by interactions with outsiders. Unlike the heirs, whose power is exercised outward, the keeper's work is quiet, invisible, and eternal. They navigate the estate's hidden corridors, consult the Codex, oversee the East Wing initiation and the West Crypt convergence, and ensure that the mirror of obedience remains aligned with the family's goals. Every shadow, every whisper, every hesitation is logged in a mental archive that spans decades. The keeper understands fear, obedience, and manipulation in ways that surpass any conventional human understanding. Legends suggest that the keeper maintains a dialogue with the echoes themselves, negotiating, controlling, and harnessing the energies of those who have passed but remain tethered to the estate. Through this connection, the keeper can subtly influence both the living and the departed, extending the Whitmore influence far beyond physical walls. It is a position of unmatched power, yet one shrouded in isolation. The keeper's loyalty must be total, their discretion unyielding. Betrayal, even unintentional, is met with permanent disappearance. The keeper's existence is a chilling reminder of the estate's true mechanism, that control is not exercised through overt authority alone, but through the careful preservation of knowledge, memory, and psychological architecture. They are the unseen hand that shapes the heirs, enforces rituals, and perpetuates the Codex's lessons, ensuring that the Whitmore legacy survives intact, generation after generation. Few ever see the keeper, and fewer survive the encounter unaltered. Those who do speak only in hushed tones, describing a presence that feels simultaneously protective, judging, and omniscient, a living embodiment of the estate's unseen power. The final reckoning is not a ceremony. It is a confrontation, the ultimate test of loyalty, perception, and self-mastery. Every Whitmore heir faces it once, and only once, in a moment designed to strip them of certainty and expose the raw machinery of the estate. Here, all training, all ritual, all observation culminates, and the line between survival and destruction is razor-thin. The reckoning takes place in the Hall of Reflections, a chamber lined with polished obsidian that mirrors the heir's every movement, yet the images are not simple reflections. They are multiplicities of intent, choice, and consequence, showing not only what the heir is but what they could become, what they fear, and what the estate demands. Shadows twist into forms that suggest judgment, accusation, and silent observation, while whispers the echoes of past failures and past triumphs crawl along the walls, reaching into the mind like icy fingers. During the reckoning, heirs must make decisions that reveal the deepest recesses of their character. A choice to act in fear, to hesitate, or to rebel is immediately reflected in the mirrors, magnified and measured. Courage, cunning, and compliance are rewarded not with comfort, but with access to higher levels of influence, a deeper understanding of the codex, the ability to manipulate human behavior at subtle, almost imperceptible levels, and a tether to the estate's unseen power that strengthens with each act of mastery. Few leave the hall unchanged. Some emerge transformed, their presence alone carrying an almost magnetic authority, their eyes reflecting knowledge and understanding that ordinary people cannot comprehend. Others falter, broken psychologically, their minds unable to reconcile the weight of the estate's expectations with their own instincts. Their echoes are absorbed into the estate, becoming part of the network that will guide, test, and enforce the next generation. The final reckoning proves the Whitmore principle. Obedience and awareness are inseparable, fear and influence intertwined, and control is absolute when the mind itself becomes the instrument. It is the moment when the estate's dominion is fully realized, when the heir is not just prepared to inherit but to perpetuate, manipulate, and extend the legacy. In this chamber, there is no escape, no compromise, no mercy, only the unrelenting clarity of the estate's design. At the center of it all, the heir understands one immutable truth. Knowledge is power, and power exacts a price. To possess the estate's secrets is to become part of them, bound forever to the machinery of influence, obligation, and the silent, eternal surveillance that defines the Whitmore family. The Whitmore estate does not end with walls, mirrors, or codices. Its influence stretches far beyond, a shadow cast across generations, unseen yet inexorably felt. Every heir, every keeper, every ritual, and every echo contributes to a web of control, observation, and manipulation that transcends geography and time. The estate's lessons extend into the minds of those who encounter its heirs, shaping decisions, perceptions, and desires without ever revealing the source. To understand the legacy of shadows is to see the invisible architecture of power. Consider the neighbors, friends, and business associates who interact with the heirs. None are untouched. Subtle gestures, the cadence of a word, a carefully placed glance, these become instruments of influence. Decisions that appear free are often guided by an unseen hand, a psychological force honed over centuries. Those who believe themselves independent are, in truth, participating in the estate's design, unknowingly perpetuating the legacy. The estate's reach also extends into secrecy itself. Archives in hidden chambers, artifacts in locked wings, and rituals like the silent oath and the final reckoning ensure that knowledge is preserved and weaponized. Each generation is taught not merely to inherit property, but to inherit dominion, mastery over perception, behavior, and belief. The Whitmores have created a lineage not defined by blood alone, but by the ability to bend reality through subtle psychological power, a silent empire sustained by fear, obedience, and secrecy. The true horror and brilliance lies in the invisibility of this dominion. Outsiders rarely perceive the threads that tie them to the estate. They only sense unease, inexplicable influence, and moments when choice feels constrained. The Whitmore's empire is not measured in land, wealth, or armies. It is measured in compliance, internalized authority, and the transmission of control through generations. The shadows they cast are as real as any wall, and just as inescapable. And now, as you, the viewer, confront this story, you must recognize your own position. The lessons here are not merely historical curiosities. They are warnings and invitations to perceive the hidden systems around you, to understand the mechanisms of influence in your life, and to awaken to the forces shaping thought, action, and loyalty. For those who are willing, the shadows offer clarity. For those unprepared, they offer only exposure and disorientation. Remember, the legacy of shadows is relentless. It is patient. It watches, observes, and records, and it never forgets. You have glimpsed the edge of the estate's world, where knowledge, power, and fear converge. What you do with that knowledge will define whether you remain a passive observer or step into your own understanding of control, mastery, and influence. Now that you've glimpsed the shadows that shape legacies, the question isn't what you've learned, it's what you'll do with it. Comment below with the phrase, "I see the unseen not once, but twice," to lock in this knowledge, signal your awareness, and claim your place among those who dare to confront truths most will never face. If you want to go even deeper, join our community of seekers. Hit subscribe, ring the notification bell, and step into a space where history, hidden power, and forbidden knowledge aren't just stories, they're tools for awakening your own influence and understanding. Share this video with someone who you know is ready to see beyond the surface, because only the brave can walk the path where secrets live.